There we go. All right, so my name is Michaud, and I'm here to talk about Rakudo Star and what that is. And so if you want to know what that is, then stick around. If you don't, feel free to leave if you get bored. I know I'm on between now and lunch, but it's not till 1 o'clock yet. All right, so I get to start with probably one of the happiest and most satisfying posts I've ever made in my life, which was this one that went out last week. And basically it said, hey everybody, Rakudo Star is released. I was extremely happy to have that post out. It's a combination of credit work. Some things about Rakudo Star that I'll be covering in this are basically summed up in the answer. But essentially, it's aimed at early adopters, we know it has bugs and things like that, so it's very, very pleased about that. Mostly, what we want to do with Rakudo Star is optimize for fun. And that's been kind of the Perl 6 motto from the Hugs days, and we're continuing on and expect to continue to do it for the foreseeable future. Before I go any further, I just wanted to do a quick poll in the room. A couple of them and some acknowledgments. How many people have downloaded Rakudo Star already? All right, so that's most of you. Okay, now the other one that I wanted to do is, how many people in here helped make Rakudo Star or Perl 6 spec? So I wanted to say to all of those of you who helped with it, thank you very much. It wouldn't have happened without any of the team of people that came together to do that. I also need to acknowledge the Perl Foundation for supporting many of us who worked on Rakudo Star and getting the pieces together. The Ian Hay grant, of course, Mr. Ian Hay, and the Mozilla Foundation were all big sponsors for all of this. So, before talking about what Rakudo Star is, I like to always talk about what it is not. Because Perl 6 has been talked about for about 2 or 3 years now. All right, maybe a little longer. And of course, expectations about what it is and is not have changed over time. So we always start by saying what Rakudo Star is not. So here's what Rakudo Star is not. First of all, it's not Perl 6.0.0. It's not a complete implementation of Perl 6. It's not a production release, and it's never been intended to be a production release. It's not stable. That's very important to know. It's not a 1.0 anything, and I've already seen a few tweets that talk about, this is version 1 of Rakudo. No, it's not version 1 of Rakudo. I'll talk more about the tagging in a little bit. It is not the official Perl 6 release. It's a Perl 6 release, and it's an official release, but it's not the official Perl 6 release. It's not just a release of the Rakudo compiler. That will make its way a little bit as well, or any release of the compiler. What Rakudo Star is, as opposed to what it is not, is it's the beginning of a series of what we call distribution releases. And I'll cover more about that in a little bit. But it's primarily aimed at what we call early adopters, the people who are interested in new technology and want to find out what it can do and to even help design and shape it to some extent. But it's not intended yet for the mainstream. It's an invitation to developers. We're now actively casting about and saying, there's an implementation of Perl 6 that's worth looking at, worth using, and worth trying. Please come and try it. Rakudo Star is not very fast. Tim Bunks was very nice to pull me aside at OSCON and say, that's understating it a little bit. So it's not very fast, it's slow. And that probably still doesn't do it justice. Okay, it's very slow. All right, so if you try comparing this to Perl 5, it's, oh my God, how can it possibly be that slow? And it just is, we know it. We have some strategies for making it much, much faster. But speed has not been our primary criterion. And I'll talk a little bit more about our plans for improving speed a little bit. It is full of bugs and challenges for developers. So if you try Rakudo Star and you start to build some substantial applications, and in some cases even not so substantial, you'll find the rough edges. You'll find the pieces that don't work. And we know that. We reached a point where in order for us to really make good progress, we need more help in finding the bugs. So that's why we're making this release. It's a means for Rakudo and the Perl 6 teams to get some feedback about what works and what doesn't work. So this is us. This is feedback. And it's a milestone in Perl 6 development. It's clearly not the end. And to my way of thinking, there's never an end in development of a language or of anything that's a living software project. So it's by no means at the end, it's just a waypoint. It's a point where we can say, okay, we've reached this particular point, now where can we go from here? It also is intended to be a change in thinking about what we mean by Perl releases. And we started identifying this last year at Yapsiro to say we need to rethink the notion of what a Perl 6 release is. And Rakudo was kind of trying to make some statements about that. So one of the first things that we want to do is we want to separate the notion of a compiler and a distribution. And so we say they're not equivalent. So the compiler is the thing that we've already had 31 releases of in Rakudo. And it is the thing that takes care of the Perl 6 language report. So the part that is defined in the synopses and the specification documents, that's what the compiler is focused on implementing. It's defined by the specification. But if you just download the compiler, that's all you're going to get. It's just the compiler. It doesn't come with any modules. It doesn't come with a lot of the other pieces that people who are used to getting Perl 5 are used to getting a fairly complete programming system. But in Rakudo, we actually separate it out to a separate project. So it's not really packaged for your typical programmer application to be able to use. And nor is there just one compiler. It's not unique, and we don't consider Perl 6 to have the Perl 6 compiler. So there are other compilers in development that somebody could choose to use. What we want to introduce is the notion of a distribution. And that's what we expect the average person who says, I want to do some Perl 6 programming. We won't tell them to go download the compiler. We'll say, go find the distribution. And Rakudo Star is intended to be the first one of these. It integrates a compiler, some modules, perhaps someday an integrated development environment, documentation, all together into a package that is a kind of a more complete package that somebody can begin working with. And we eventually see there being multiple of these as well. Different distributions can target different audiences or needs. And so there's not going to be just one distribution. Even in the Rakudo framework, we don't expect there to be just one over the long term. So why is it called Star? We developed a motto last year that is kind of the motto of the Rakudo project, which is under promise and over deliver. Which is that we'd like to say, this is what we're going to give you, and then when you actually get it, then you get a lot more than what we promised. So we want to make sure that we meet our promises, but we'd like to deliver more than that. And so the name was a very important piece of that. We needed a name that could simultaneously be both usable, that is, you can download it and use it, but at the same time, we didn't want to promise that you could use it to write your large-scale applications. We didn't want a name that would indicate production. And so that threw out the 1.0 number. If we called it Rakudo 1.0, a lot of people in the open source world, 1.0 means very stable, very well tested. And clearly Rakudo at this level was not going to be that. So we didn't want to call it that. So we said, well, why not call it Rakudo Beta? And Beta also had the wrong connotation for us. It kind of means don't use this unless it's a Google application, in which case it means everybody used this for years and years before they released it for beta. So we tried that, and that wasn't going to work. We tried 0.5, half of 1, but that still kind of says don't use this, and so we didn't want that. From there, our names got a little bit crazy. Since Perl 6 comes at Christmas, and this was not Christmas yet, let's call it Easter. But we decided that was a little bit too much there. The Rakudo Invention Edition, I still like this name. And so this is really kind of what we should do it. Ultimately, we just started calling it X. We couldn't come up with a name, so we said, X, right? And everyone said, well, what does X mean? Well, it kind of means whatever. And in Perl 6, especially if you saw Larry's talk, we have a name for whatever. It's an asterisk. Asterisk is whatever, and so it just became Rakudo Star, and that's how we came up with the name. And that name is has seemed to stick really well and seems to work well in practice for a number of different reasons, as we'll see here in a bit. So Star, this name, is not the name of a release. It's the name of a series of releases, of distribution releases for the next phase of Perl development. And the analogy that I drew from in trying to come up with even the name Star last year was to look at the lunar moon missions that the United States did in the 1960s. And they actually, in the process of getting a man to the moon, they had different phases that the project went through. The first phase was eventually called Mercury. And that was the phase where they said, how do we get a rocket into space without blowing up? And then the second phase was Gemini, which was, okay, we can get a rocket in space, and we need the people in the space, how can they do things in space? Just maneuver around, be able to do docking, things like that, and be able to work in space. And then the Apollo missions were the ones that said, how do we get all the way to the moon, land, and come back? And so each one of these were stages, there were phases of the overall project, and within that they had different missions. And I said, well, I want Star to be the same way. The Star is a set of releases, the next phase of our Perl 6 project in Rakudo. And instead of having missions like we would in the Moon project, for us those are releases. So we'll have the first release of Rakudo Star, which was last week. Then we'll have subsequent releases, and each release is intended to advance us along to our ultimate goals. And when Rakudo Star reaches a point where it's sufficiently advanced that we're beyond the early adopter phase, we'll come up with a new name for the next series to indicate that transition from, this is for early adopters to be something like, you should really start using this. And then we haven't figured out what the new series will be named yet. Corporate sponsors might be interested in that, so curious if we can do that. Some people have asked if they could name individual releases, and we're looking into that. So the release was last Thursday, which was an exciting day for many of us on the team. So to give you some of the sense of what happened last Thursday, I planned the release to be last Thursday, July 29th, at 12 o'clock UTC. I actually named it down to the minute. I said, we're going to release exactly at that time. I chose 12 o'clock UTC because it seemed like an angstrom number, and also that would be the time when most of the world would be July 29th. Although it seems to miss New Zealand, for them it's already midnight the next day, so they got the Rakudo release a day late. But it was a nice time to do that. Now, where I live in Texas, 12 o'clock UTC corresponds to about 7 o'clock in the morning, which is a reasonable time. I had to get up a little bit early. To be quite honest, I couldn't sleep all night the night of the release because I was pretty excited about it. And so I started counting down at 10 o'clock UTC. So all the times in UTC here, people were coming into the Perl 6 channel, which is where most of the development takes place. And I just started to count down and say T-minus 120. Maureen said, is that the target? And I said, yes, that's the target. That's when we're going to do the release. 10 minutes later, I said T-minus 110 because I was really anxious. Solomon Foster, who goes by the decoupled, came in and he said T-minus 110. Whoa, he thought it was going to be that night. So he had a celebration plan where he was going to have a drink of scotch that night when Rakudo Star came out, but it was going to come out at 8 o'clock in the morning, so he figured that wasn't a good time to have a drink. And I said, well, you can celebrate for as long as you want, then have a drink. So you can do that. We got to T-minus 30, so 30 minutes to release, and then a bug showed up. Somebody else came in and said, I was able to build Beta 8. There were pre-release tarballs that I put out the previous day. I was able to build Beta 8, but it doesn't run on his PC. It might be my fault for having a messed up environment. So it's running Windows 7, and I was like, well, that's your problem. But it's a program can't start because libparrot.dll is missing